So welcome everybody. As you can see down the bottom, there's a few of us on camera. So myself, I'm Gail Chapman. I'm the Public Programmes Officer at the Royal College of Physicians from home. And we also have with us Liz, who's our Collections Officer, and Larry, who is our Senior Curator, and of course our star of the show, Andrew Carnie, who will be presenting for us all shortly. Now I will stop doing all my boring bits and hand over to our senior curator, Larry, who's going to give us a bit of an introduction to the museum and the exhibition in which Andrew's work features.
Thank you, Gail. So hello and welcome to today's RCP Museum Late Boundaries and the Body with Andrew Carnie, who you can see down the bottom here. So I'm really sad that we can't actually welcome you into the building this evening, and so that you can see our, exhibition in the flesh, as it were. But hopefully this is a nice distraction for your first evening of our second lockdown. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Royal College of Physicians, it's a medical charity which represents about 38,000 doctors across the world. The core mission of the college is to improve patient health and reduce illness. And as well as being a modern healthcare charity, it's also an organisation that's got 500 years of history. So as of this year, it's 502 years old. So, fairly ancient. This history is looked after by the Library, Archive and Museum Services Department, which the three of us are part of. And we care for a huge range of collections. So we've got all sorts of things: rare books, artwork, medical instruments, silverware, manuscripts, sort of you name it, we've probably got some somewhere. We also have a modern reference library sort of in normal times. And when we are open, these are all available for research and they're displayed around the building. And the public can come in and we use them all in our exhibitions and events programme. So even though you can't visit at the moment, our current exhibition, Under the Skin, Anatomy, Art and Identity, is online at the moment. So we have a digital version for you to explore, which one of us will put in the chat for you to have a look at soon. And Under the Skin looks at how anatomical art represents the body. So the body is a 3D entity, and showing it in 2D has been done in various different ways over the years. It looks at the techniques that have been developed for showing it, but also thinks about the power that's implicit in representing the body. Whose bodies are actually being used, who is doing the looking, who decides how these bodies are represented. As part of this, we've been really lucky to work with a wide range of contemporary artists, and their work has sort of added this extra element and allowed us different ways of reflecting on these different representations of the body. One of these artists is Andrew, who joins us tonight, and his work, Unfolding Sheets Towards a View of One's Own Head, is part of the exhibition. So I'm really pleased to be able to welcome Andrew to talk. So I think that's plenty enough for me, and I'll hand over to Andrew to tell us a bit more about his recent work.
Right, great. Thank you everybody for being here. The Royal College of Physicians for the opportunity to exhibit, and all of those people that have made it possible. I'm kind of talking to you from where I teach, and I teach at Southampton University in the art school at Winchester. And I'm afraid it's kind of slightly dark and slightly mysterious here as a result of one of the lights blowing earlier and not working. And you may hear some bangs. It's been quite loud. There's already been quite a lot of fireworks going off in Winchester for November the 5th. But my background, as I said, is as a lecturer and a teacher for a couple of days a week, and then I'm in the studio the other few days, and that's been my practice for something like going on 30 years now, making different work. I'm going to kind of introduce what I'm talking about a little bit at the beginning and my background, and then go through a sequence of slides. I do have a habit of sometimes forgetting that I've got slides, and I have been known to talk only showing one slide out of 60 on one talk up in Vane in Newcastle of late. So we'll see how it goes. But I wanted to give a little bit of a background really to what I do and why I do it and how I do it. And starting with, and I think there's always this temptation in a sense to kind of tell a story of the work, and to kind of rationalize it later on as to why you do certain things. But it does strike me that certain things are significant. And I've got 2 or 3 stories that say about why I come about what I do. One of them involves the drawing of a tree and it not being put up on the wall, but I'm not going to go there. One is about my parents, and they're dragging me around art galleries time after time. But I think the one that's kind of significant to this is really an accident I had in the Scouts when I fell and hurt my knee very badly, and I couldn't do sports at school. So I was sent to the library for week after week. And one of the things I became aware of, or really liked, was these drawings that are represented here. And they're actually the drawings from Encyclopedia Britannica. And they're on cellophane. And I say they're drawings, they're print. But I think I was really fascinated by them. And I think that it's one of the things that kind of comes back now to haunt my work. But what I'm also going to introduce you, I'm going to introduce you to a little bit of early work, just to give the kind of scope of what I do and why I do it. Because I think there are some kind of underlying themes really that come out, and things that, again, I reflect as you kind of look for this etiology of your work. There's a kind of history, and there's things that kind of affect what you do. There's a couple of early pieces from 30 years ago, paintings. But what I'm struck by, in some way, there's a sense of inside and outside, or a boundary being broken. In one of them, it's very strange, and I don't know what the rationale for it was. It's a painting I rather like. It's got a television screen, and it's got a kind of figure that's made out of replicas of baguettes running through it. I just want to, say it kind of breaks the surface, and then the one next to it's got hammers that are kind of in the real world. So there was something about being in the real world and in the imagined world that was quite important, I think, in that terms. And these are 2 other kind of large-scale paintings right back from when I was at the Royal College, or just finishing the Royal College. Paintings that are quite large. They're probably 8 or 10 feet across, but they have protrusions. They have things that stick out of them into a real world. And I think that was kind of quite significant. I think there are other batches of work that are quite like that. And this is later work, sculptural work, using suitcases that I made. And again, there's this thing about kind of, and these don't represent it necessarily, but the inside and an outside of a case. The case as a kind of body, a kind of location of things that might happen. And I suppose, and if you can look at the one with almost like the flag that runs between the 2 suitcases, this is kind of what's inside. It's almost like a bit of kind of twisted gut in a sense. And then the one at the bottom with all of the rooms, it's kind of exposing a space. It's exposing what is inside these cases, which I really like, which people don't really kind of recognize in a way, which is the interior of the case as being this highly decorative space. Brown exterior of all these old cases, and then this kind of rather beautiful space, which for this was almost like a remembrance of somewhere like the Alhambra, or some kind of Mezarabic place, Moroccan place, with tile work. So these were kind of significant things to me. In terms of contextualizing the work, I'm going to hopefully talk about 2 projects in a way, and in the middle, I'm going to talk about the books and the laser cut books. But I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about where my interest came and what I've been doing. So I really kind of wanted then to talk about a project called Hybrid Bodies, which is still an ongoing project, but one that I think I've been involved in for almost 10 years. And it involves working with a heart transplant unit in Toronto in Canada. And I've been working there for this extended period with somebody, Margaret Shudder, who calls herself a biophilosopher, the head of the team, Heather Ross, artist Alexa Wright, and 4 artists altogether, working on this project. And it was really, I think it's kind of seminal in a way in terms of the work and what I'm interested in. It's involved interviews with people that have had transplants. The important aspect of it was that the interviews were not done in a hospital. They were not done in the location of a hospital which brings with it lots of things like gratitude. Because obviously in a heart transplant, there is an unfortunate person that's died, and there's a family in shock, and there's all sorts of things going on. And it was to try and move away from that, to really see how the people were in themselves, that the interviews were done at home. And I had the privilege of then watching these interviews time after time in a kind of a secure setting in Toronto, in the hospital. These interviews that can last from 30 minutes to an hour about the experience of transplant. And I think what I'd just like to say about it in a sense is that it really gave me a sense of the boundaries between people. Obviously, if something's been transplanted into you from outside another person, this is an enormous breaking of the boundary of who you are and your identity. And I think what's really telling about the project was, in a sense, even if kind of psychological things weren't going on, and there's been lots of rumors in red top newspapers about the well-being of people and their psychological effects of being taken over by the person whose heart it was. And there are some interesting kind of examples. But the feeling I came away with really was, with such an event happening and with the background of all of this conversation, it can't but help to affect somebody in their attitude to their bodies and themselves and the world, and break down those kind of boundaries. And I think particularly striking in this was a man describing his transplant and sort of beating his chest and saying, I've got a really strong heart. I know this heart. This heart is the heart of a young woman. Well, in this case, and in Canada, and in this particular state, there's anonymity. And so the patient, the recipient of the heart, certainly didn't know anything about where the heart had come from. The team do and did. And in this case, it came from quite an elderly man in his 50s, well, elderly man, a man in his 50s. So the gender was wrong and the age was wrong. But I can't help but think, and I'm sure in the interview, what came over was that there had been a huge psychological effect. There's a boundary that had been broken by this kind of event. And this speculation had changed and transformed this person greatly in a way. And there were many, many incidents, small incidents like this, and kind of feelings that the psychology of somebody or the boundary had been broken between people and something had got inside them in a different way. And I think also striking was an Indian gentleman talking about his heart transplant, and he was a Hindu. And in Hindu, death is heart death, basically. It's not, they don't rely on like a brain death, it's heart death. So if his, in that sense, was he still alive? His heart had died, it had been removed from his body, and he had somebody else's heart inside him. And what then was the relationship to that? So there's a kind of muddling of very interesting kind of psychology going on. And I was very fascinated by the stories. My way of working, and I think you saw in the slide before, there was a screen and there was a couple of people at a table. We were replaying the interviews that were all taped and recorded. One of the fascinating points about the whole exercise is that the analysis did not just involve written word or spoken word, but it involved looking at the state of the person, how they were and how they looked. And it involved a great deal of analysis of, their feelings really, which you could tell a lot more through the body than you could through the word of the things that they were saying. And that was really important. And my way of kind of interpreting all of this difficult information was to sit there and to draw. And then I made works from the drawing. So I think the next few slides, if you run through those, are one of the videos that I made. So the very thing that I became interested in the project was really the boundaries. It seemed like from the project, our bodies don't end at the skin in a way. Other people kind of affect them, and this kind of donation of an organ, breaks that boundary. So I became very interested in bodies and where they end and the effect. So I in the videos, I think if you go on through 2 or 3 slides now, you will see the kinds of work that I made. It was a kind of large, long video piece that I made that was 2 video projectors, so about 6 or 8 meters wide, from there.
So these are stills of a very 20-minute long video that projects onto a long wall, and they express elements that came out of the project about, really what we found, in the project was that there was a lot of sadness and a lot of depression and a lot of worry, really, which wasn't marked and wasn't indicated in the hospital censuses of people and how they were doing. So that was one of the things that I made kind of work around and out of. And I another one was the kind of sense of barrier. I think there was a lot of sense of people being very worried about what was going on to them in this hospital-like situation. And I was quite interested in how the male subjects seemed to be silent about their experience in a way. So I made another piece which is just demonstrated here, Lacuna, about that, about putting up barriers and about organs and things, and about how the body and the operation was viewed. This was almost like looking in to where the heart should be. So again, it went through lots of kind of sequences. Made a third video that really kind of explored this idea of kind of personality being removed and something being replaced by it. Kind of looking at the kind of psychological effects of the operation. And these were parts of it, and referring to a famous painting by Montaigne to do that. I made other objects as well. I was very conscious that the video kind of work around the body was one thing and might attract a certain kind of audience, but I was very aware that the work became very kind of ethereal and kind of not there. And so one of the things as a response to the fear in patients about contamination, I suppose, and about getting infection, because obviously one of the results of having a transplant is that you have to be on immunosuppressants for life, basically, was this notion of cleanliness. And I wanted to bring the audience for the show back to that reality of it. And I made 8 or 9 quite large soap hearts that actually for the exhibition were placed in the cloakroom of the gallery. And it was really interesting. The cloakrooms, the male and the female toilets, were either side of this central thing, which was almost like a scrub space. And people really didn't notice the hearts when they went into the bathroom, but were only confronted with them when they came out, and suddenly they were there, and that was the soap basically that they could wash their hands with. So they had this kind of relationship with the heart and washing it away, and each heart had a new heart inside it. So embedded in this soap was a new heart. So that was kind of a number of kind of pieces that I made pieces about loss and whatever. The very important part about the project to me, though, in a way, was all of the activities that have gone on surrounding it and the interactions with transplant surgeons, specialist nurses, and in a way that the whole project raised elements of, some of the distress that was experienced that wasn't really being recorded in the hospital. And the team, and not me, because I was making artwork, but the more academic side of the team has published quite a number of papers, including a paper in the BMJ journal, and around the findings that they found. And the whole aim of it, in a sense, was to bring back this sense of what the distress might be, kind of psychological distress, to an audience, and to readjust how heart transplant was talked about, that it wasn't talked about in a kind of simply Cartesian way of a swapping out a pump or a motor. It was obviously much more complex than that. Right, I'm going to talk a bit about the laser cut books and how they start in a way. As a kind of prelim to the conversation, there was a question about what I was doing in a little video, and I said I was doing watercolours. I started to do watercolours about 8 years ago as a way of trying to be, in a sense, some flesh and blood back into the experience. I talked about the soaps being physical, but I wanted something also, some way of working with the material to do that in a more physical way and colour. Though these are black and white, the aim was to do these watercolours. So I started painting quite a lot in a way. I started using elements that occur in the work around bodies. And what you see here is a long projection piece, which has this kind of fretwork of, in this case, it will be an arterial system, I think. And these are the kinds of things that were going on in the studio. I was making paintings and drawings and doing drawings on plastic like this that basically originated in the projection pieces. So I'd drawn various bodies that had been projected in these large projection pieces. So I had this, I suppose, I guess like a palette that I was beginning to use. And one of the things happened as I started to with the watercolors, I decided that actually I could make some of the watercolors using a stencil, and this was another way of breaking the tradition of watercolor. So I made a stencil out of using a laser. So I had these bodies cut, and they were on a computer, and I had the stencils cut out of card, and then I used them and started to use them as the backgrounds for these watercolors. These are a couple of responses to it, and you can see the kind of figurative things. I have no idea what's going to happen when I start them. And they started making whole sets of work out of it. One of the interesting things that I'm doing, so this is it. So you see this stencil here, and this would be the kind of thing that I've used to paint through to begin to lay down the background, this body of which a place where transactions happened. One of the interesting things that's happened since doing the watercolors is that I started making them in layers, and I was quite interested in joining them together. And I thought of stitching them as in the heart transplant. And actually, I needed a long-armed sewing machine to do it. I asked Alice Kettle, who was a local, very well-known textile artist, whether I could borrow a long-armed sewing machine from her to do it. She came to the studio, said, "No, Andrew, you can't borrow it. I actually want to do the stitching for you." And this has led to a whole kind of project and some elements of the books in that she stitched them together. And since then, I've produced kits that other people are meant to react to the research and stitch things together, and they become artworks. The project's been called Junctures of a Haphazard Kind. So I have no idea what people are going to do. This set on the table are the kits ready to go off, and they're actually currently in the United States, in Kansas, being stitched together by textile artists for an exhibition that will take place in the new year. But it led to all these kind of background things, making different kinds of work. This is another project I was doing around immunology in the body and boundaries. I'm quite interested, there's this sense of self that originates with our kind of brains, but then the immune system, in a sense, defines who we are. It says, this is us and this is the enemy. I was quite interested in this, and this has made me attempting to make a piece using bacteria growing through a stencil. So it has an agar gel for the bacteria to grow on. It didn't really work. I was using a bacteria that stains red, but it didn't work. It would grow on the tape all the way around the image, but not on the image. But these are the kinds of things that I was making in the response. This is something I made, in this case, with pollen, and just this reflecting on the importance of the lymphatic system as a way. And this is another one here, which is made from the pollen of fungus. So these were all things that we as a body defend against. But the important thing was that in the background, then all of this kind of work with the stencils was going on. And I was getting kind of more elaborate and more complex. I started making kind of larger scale installations with it, using light and reflecting. This was a project I was doing on sleep and reflecting with the waves, of the various waves of sleep as sleep and dreams take over us. This is what the actual kind of piece looks like in close-up before it kind of projects and is in the dark. I started cutting things out of, this is a piece on the sleep which is cut out of lamb's leather, a dreamy piece that has kind of waves that run around it, which is now presented as slightly different. It's slightly bigger piece. But this is all the kind of work that I was making that led up, in a sense, to the stencil pieces and the books. So I think what happened then really was, while I was away on a residency, I got a phone call saying, it was just a general discussion, and and somebody said, "Oh, we're doing this exhibition," and it happened to be in Toronto. And they said, "Oh, could you produce something for it?" And they said, "We've got these glass cases around the medical school that we'd like to populate." And I don't know for what reason. I think it's because I'd kind of looked at these books before. I thought, oh, instead of using the computer files and the laser to cut out stencil card, why don't I try and see what happens if I cut through a concertinaed book? And these concertinaed books I'd come across but never used. You know, in Cass Arts, they were there for painting kind of, you know, time-based almost drawings and work. And I just thought, oh, that's really interesting. What happens if you begin to cut through those different layers? What will the effect of that be? And that's how this piece came about. This is it. This is the second version. I've made two versions of it. So the piece went to Toronto. It was four A4 books, and then when the opportunity to show at the Royal College of Physicians came around, I decided to make a smaller version, and that was this 8-book piece that happened. That had this falling out. And one of the things I really like that this demonstrates, in a way, depending on how it's presented, it can be presented in many, many different ways. As it folds out, it produces different kinds of images and different kind of interactions as we expose this kind of body. And I think I'm kind of interested in that as a sense that we're not fixed in some kind of way. I've begun recently to make a couple of pieces of books, and this is a recent piece around the Heart Project, and this piece includes two cuts, in a way, of two different hearts that then have this effect about how the image comes together and how you see it. And in this case, I've kind of gone back to the stitching, and the pages are stitched together to make a different kind of work. And this is another kind of piece that I've been making as well, around two whole bodies that are kind of basically joined at the head and at the brain, but reflect on the heart transplant and the body. And this is possibly one way of presenting it. I quite like these little, I don't know, you can see the little pockets almost of things that come together, and you see it in different ways. What I quite like about them is the sense that they go out to museums and places, and it's kind of almost up to the curator to decide how they're presented in different formats. So I'm not sure how they're going to be presented. So there's whole schemes of work have now come out of the laser cut books and are kind of moving forward. I'm working on a piece with trees currently, which is another kind of work that I've been involved in. I think time is getting on, so I'm going to just quickly finish up, because there's another interesting aspect to this, and the kind of talking about the body and the boundaries. One of the other projects I've been involved in recently was a 3-year project that finished kind of January, February up in Newcastle, was around optogenetics and the introduction of a small device to affect cells. And I've become very interested in, again, about how the body might be breached by medical implements. And in this case, there has to be genetic manipulation so that the light that this little optrode produces can affect different cells and basically stimulate them. And hopefully it's going to be used to suppress epileptic attacks. But the project has many ways that it might develop, the optogenetics and its use as a kind of medical device. So those are other kind of areas. This is a kind of slide. These little T-shaped things represent the introduction into the brain of this project. And so I've been working quite a lot with sensors in the gallery space to affect sculptures that come on and off and unbalance the kind of an audience. They're often around the body, and there's different sensors that make these pieces of work. So this work relies on the viewer being sensed by sound, and the sounds they make in the space will light it up in different sorts of ways and whole different things. And I've started to work with the complexity of the introduction of these devices and the medical legal implications in this work here, which is called A Tale of Two, which tries to kind of put two sides of the story of the complexities. I mean, I'll just end on a little story about these implications, about, in a sense, these are the boundaries being broken because somebody sets the algorithms outside your body to set these kind of tools. And a few years back, when Dick Cheney was vice president of the United States, he'd had a device to help his heart, a pacemaker, but it had a wireless connection to the outside, so people can be monitored in a way. And actually, it had to be removed. The FBI and the CIA were very worried that terrorists could manipulate the device, and so the wireless aspect was taken out. And I'm kind of interested in these boundaries and the complexity of boundaries in the future, and how it might be work. I think I just end there. I know we've been a bit broken up. I'm very sorry about it. I can't understand quite why the signal was not kind of run through. But I just, in conclusion, it's just like the work kind of looks at a sense of ourselves and what the science brings to us. What does it tell us about who we are and what we are? And, very much through the Heart Project, I feel very much more part of a community and interconnected. And I think all the things that we learn about the microbiome and things like that make us much more connected to the environment. And we should be much more conscious of it, our relationship to other people and to the things of the world, really. And I think I'd like to finish there. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Andrew. And thank you for finding many other devices so that you can keep talking to us.
I believe that it was here.
Okay, so I think what we should do next is I'm going to just close your presentation. That pops us all up on screen. Unless your camera's working, Andrew. Do you want to try again?
I've just tried it. Nothing has happened. No, it's saying it's unavailable.
Okay.
I don't know why.
Well, we can still hear you nice and clearly.
Yes.
So if anyone has any questions, if they'd like to pop them in the chat or in the Q&A would be preferable if possible, the little question mark one on the side, then Andrew is available to answer. And if you have any questions, or possibly not available, oh dear, he's dropped out again. I'm sure he'll be back with us shortly. If anyone has any questions about the museum collection or upcoming events or other artists within the collection just now, Larry and Liz are both on hand to be able to answer those questions as well. So please feel free to type questions for Andrew or ourselves. In the meantime, whilst everyone's typing, I actually had one for Larry listening to Andrew there. I didn't get much of a chance to see the Andrew's piece of work in the exhibition. And he was talking about how it was up to the curator how to display the books. I was wondering how it was displayed at the RCP.
So let me just see. I'm trying to remember how the picture is on the website. But you probably can't see it because it's quite a difficult piece to photograph because there are a number of different books. I believe it's 8. And the way they're displayed in our cases was a bit limited by the fact that we don't have much depth. So the cases are quite flat. So we couldn't really do any of the kind of elaborate concertinaing that we saw in his photographs, which I think would have been fantastic if we'd been able to. But because we only had a sort of relatively small space in which to display them, they're mostly flat, but then with a few of them folded out. Is that accurate? No, I think they're the other way around. Sorry, I think they're vertical with a few concertinas, but in a much more compact way. Yes, we can, Andrew.
Yes, we can, Andrew. Sorry, whilst we lost you, we were just chatting about your piece.
Yeah, again, I think I was trying to get the video back, and then I kind of went completely again. So I think you had 2 books on display. So one is upright with the pages folded in a semicircle, so you can see into it, and there was another one flat, so you could look onto it. And it was, I quite like that. I mean, it's a solution to the situation, and it's the same. I mean, in the cases in Toronto, they actually, it turned out that I'd relied on them having shelves in these cases, and actually having 4 shelves and 4 books. And then it turned out they didn't have shelves, so they had to kind of improvise. But I like that. It's what happens with the work, how's it interpreted, how does it move forward. And hopefully all of the work is kind of open enough for kind of interpretation in some way or another.
And it's fantastic to have that kind of flexibility within a work when you're displaying it, because it's, like you say, it gives you a bit more freedom in terms of logistics, but also means that, even though you're displaying something that may have been displayed elsewhere, what you've got is actually a unique representation of that. I think that's a really kind of appealing thing as a curator, sort of, to have within the exhibition.
Yeah, and I can be a bit lazy, really, because I think sometimes the curators are coming up with more interesting ideas than I had in the first place. That's the other good thing, that they, things will be exposed in the different ways that they're presented. And certainly they may lead to new works in a way. Yeah.
Has anyone else got any questions they'd like for Andrew whilst he's on? We've had some nice comments, Andrew, in the chat. I don't know if you can see the chat section.
I can't at the minute.
Okay.
I'm not going to try anything.
That's fair enough. We're not going to try anything. So there's been thank yous, and there's also been someone who's shared that it stimulated a tremendous range of ideas for art to do with their own history of work as a naturopath and osteopath. And poems written after a blood transfusion that individual had. There's also another comment. Someone says they get the sense the work is a continuous lifetime project. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting what work is and what you set out to do and how it comes about. Yeah, I do. I mean, I think it was one of the reasons I went into the arts. I kind of did see it as something that you could do at all ages and different ways. And if you look at the examples of other painters, their longevity in painting, I was always a great fan of Miro, the Spanish painter, and Picasso, and they had very long lives of being engaged in things. And I think that was good. And it's, and then Matisse, working really with his cutouts into late age, so it is a lifetime's work, and I think it exposes different things. I think one of the things that's been quite interesting is, again, I don't know if I haven't really talked about it, but the tree-like form is really important to me, that taxonomic form. But it's also kind of a sense that there's a pinnacle of something. And I've kind of begun to realise that there's no pinnacle, that there aren't dead ends in it a way. There's not like a tree of life, dead ends where a species kind of dies out or it's finished. In a sense, it's two trees coming together, and you pass on things. It's a bit more like a blood system with the arterial and the venal system, passing ideas back and forth. And so things that I've historically thought that were dead ends have become rich in my life. So I left university. I was at Durham reading zoology and left prematurely to paint and to be an artist. Didn't think that I thought that the biology bit had ended. 10 years later, it becomes the mainstream of my work, and has done for something like 20 years now. So that reconnected with all of those parts of a lifetime, and that's continuously true. All these little ventures that you go off produce an idea that then comes back into your life and becomes important. So it's ongoing. And I think that, sorry, and there was one other point, and in fact it was in my notes to make. I mean, people look like they've come from nowhere, but one of the things about telling the story about the things, and about, I started off with the watercolors, and then I suddenly realized I could make a stencil out of these, computer files that I had. That's the history. They progress stage by stage, and then they become something interesting. Each work moves to the next thing, really. I mean, I've made quite a lot of light pieces out of the stencils, because one day I was fiddling around with a torch in the studio, or the lights didn't work, and suddenly I realized they made amazing shadows. Oh, and then that becomes interesting. That's a possibility, and that's continued all the time. And that, and that's been added to because I've used stencils quite a lot in the show in Newcastle at the Hatton Gallery. But then I added the sensors, so it was switching on and off the lights. And then from the sensors, I began to, all those mechanisms became interesting. So I started using magnets in pieces and things like that. So it's always growing, developing, and changing.
I have a question, actually, Andrew.
Yeah.
I remember one of the things that really struck me when we installed the books was the smell. So the kind of charred paper smell was really sort of distinctive. And I think we're even going in the case for other reasons afterwards, it's, you know, sort of really present. And I just wondered if you could tell us a bit more about the kind of practical process of making the books. So I know you're laser cut, but is that something that's freehand or programmed somehow? Kind of how does it actually work?
It's programmed, yeah. So
Right.
I've got the drawings and I make outlines from the drawings. I kind of limit them. They're sometimes full color, kind of like, they'd be like a medical illustration that I've done. And then I basically, in Photoshop, apply files that just selects the outlines. And then they're transferred into Illustrator to get paths.
Mm-hmm.
And it's those paths I provide. We're lucky at the art school where I work, we have a really nice, very accurate laser cutter. And then I hand it over to the technician. And then they produce the file that allows the head of the laser to move around on the page. And then it starts from there. One of the things I have become interested in of late, I've had, the books are slightly dodgy in the sense that it's burning through the pages, and there's a kind of sense in which the pages lower down could burn and catch fire. So I have to sit with them. But the nice thing about that of late, again, it's kind of this experience of what happens. Of late, I've realised that, you know, I'm allowed to switch on and off the machine. I can slightly alter the machine. I can also slightly alter the depth of the head and the cut. So if it's close, you get more burning. If it's far away, you get a lighter cut. So all of these things are now beginning to come into play. And I said, describing the one I've made recently of the two hearts in the concertina book, you know, live in a sense, I was deciding where the second cut would be in relationship to the first cut. So I'm kind of overlapping them. So there's beginning to be a kind of, yeah, I don't know what you'd call it really, but there's proper kind of hands-on kind of experience. I mean, you know, I've talked to them about being able to do it, you know, like hand-free and move, because you could basically move the laser head around with the arrows and the cursors. I think there's some practical reasons why I'm not allowed to do that. I mean, you know, I would throw caution to the wind, but it's an expensive bit of kit, and I'm sure they're right. So that's the process, and so you know, I do quite a lot of drawings, deciding in the concertina books, you know, how many pages are going to be stacked up, how it's going to relate, trying to work out how far it will burn through. So there are different settings. You can do a setting for burning watercolor paper, which will only burn a few sheets. But then if you burn through it as though you're burning through 2 millimeter ply, then it will have another effect. And just a bit, I suppose, on the smell, I kind of rather like it. And actually, what I was trying to do, and I don't know kind of what the take was, and it's partly why I've started working with the trees on it. And that kind of came about in part. It was something I wanted to do. Then an opportunity arose that didn't quite happen, which was to show in Lisbon in Portugal about a year and a half ago. But it seemed like the piece would have a relationship to all of the terrible forest fires that they had that in that previous year I'd seen, you know, on the mountains, and where, you know, people really unfortunately got trapped. And I wanted to, you know, there's something. Well, I suppose that one of the interesting things, one of the reasons I wanted it, right, is because when it burns through at different strengths through the pages, so that the image bleeds out to nothing. And I suppose I wanted to make some kind of comment about our forests disappearing through that process. Again, with the one that you've got, there was something about the brain and almost like dementia, that it was there, and the image of the brain kind of gradually disappears as it moves through the pages. But these are things that I think about that they're not inherent. It's not what the work is about, but they're readings that maybe an audience could make or begin to think about.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. We haven't actually had any more questions, although someone, Rishenda, I apologize if I'm saying your name wrong, mentioned that they've actually been out recording an ancient lime avenue tree by tree today. So the tree work seems to be something that's resonating with those. Exactly.
Well, it's echoed through years of my work. It seems to be a reoccurring kind of element. I can't get very far away from drawing some kind of dendritic form in some pattern or other, this connectedness and relationship of trees. And I think these are kind of findings more recently about how they relate to kind of fungal mycelium, and how different acacia trees can almost talk to each other and warn of giraffes eating one tree will then lose the leaves on another tree. I mean, this is quite extraordinary, and I think something that we should be very sensitive to, that we have and are part of this very complex relationship.
Do you explicitly draw a connection between the sort of tree-like forms in that body of work and the forms of the body in some of the earlier things that you showed us?
Yeah, I
Is
think
that
it's
more
definitely
coincidence?
No, I think there is a relationship, and that's continued as a kind of, as an aspect of it. I've just become more and more interested about that form, and it's when you think about the complexity of the body and the biology of how we've been created, if you've got to take nutrients to a place an ever smaller size, then this dendritic form is kind of almost the only way that you can do it. And especially if it's kind of three-dimensional, and the only way that you can take the detritus of cell biology away is through another dendritic form. It's kind of fascinating, really. And then when you think about ideas in the brain and the all our systems, all our major systems, lymphatic system, renal system, nervous system, are all built out of this complex tree-like form. But I also think it's kind of really interesting that often when we think about trees, we have a kind of quite a clear picture of this kind of stem, stalk, and branches, and we so often forget like what's underneath this other equal branching system that collects all the nutrients and the water and provides the tree with us. So I think that's also emblematic of like needing to look at our bodily systems in a more complex way,
We've had a question through from Yen Yen. My apologies, I'm not entirely sure. Asked, do you have a preferred medium, e.g., film or drawing or painting?
Well, yeah, I pretty much do all of them. I still I like all of them. I mean, I think I've done kind of reasonable work in all of the formats. I do like the film, but working on the computer so much kills me, and I can't stand it anymore. I like the physicality of painting and whatever, but I haven't. I don't know of late. I'm struggling to kind of find what I want to say with paint, and I'm working on that. That's been a long project. I went to the Royal College originally to do painting, loved it, and then I got distracted by sculpture, and then photography, and then video, and I like them all. But actually, I suppose one of the things I could say is the video and the way that I make video, which is like I make kind of almost like slow film. The long figure piece I showed, I mean, it lasts 22 minutes. It's like many paintings piled upon one another, and that's how I see it. So I kind of think, although I'm making film or video, it's still I'm making painting. And I think I refer to Mantegna in the Lacuna piece. There's a lot of references to painters that are made through the pieces. So yeah, that happens. So I'm not sure. I like them all. I think I'd love to be a painter, but I have to face the fact that I'm probably not.
I think you just answered. There was a follow-up, which was, if you had to pick one, gun to your head, which one? So.
Painting. Yeah, painting. Yeah, painting. But yeah.
Lovely.
But all of them have been fascinating. I mean, that's the amazing thing about, in a sense, being an artist, that sometimes it's driven by boredom. You've done one thing enough, but you've got a day to fill. What else can you do? And so you can, or for a time, you can switch medium. And I think that's really helpful to move from medium to medium. I've learned a lot. I think I became a much better painter when I made video and film for 10 years, because I was still looking at a lot of painting, and I was kind of absorbing it. And I think that the big thing about any practice is the embodiment of practice, and the way that you work with your hands and your mind, and you have to do it and learn it as a kind of process that's integral, so that when you're doing it, you don't think about it in a way. And I use Radio 4 so that I don't think, or I'm thinking of other things. It plays in the background. I'm concentrating while I'm making something, and that allows you just to kind of naturally get on with it. It's like that riding a bike, being a natural bike rider, or playing tennis. It's got to be integrated into you.
Okay, well, I think we should probably round up there since it has just gone 7 o'clock, and we don't have any further questions in at this moment. So thank you everyone for staying along with us. Just before you all leave, Larry's going to do a little pitch for the museum. So for those of you who are still with us, and of course, thank you so much, Andrew, for your time this evening.
Yeah, no, well, thank you. And I must say, it's a spectacular building with a really interesting collection, and people should go.
Great. Well, thank you, Andrew, and thank you everyone for joining us. I'm glad you gave up whatever chances you had of seeing fireworks today to come and join us this evening. As I mentioned before, we do have a series of exhibition-related events on at the moment. So the next one is on the 3rd of December, and it's Narratives of the Heart with artist Sophie Layton, whose piece The Bud, which you can see on screen, is also in the exhibition. That's going to be really good. So please come along to that if you can. You can also see the exhibition online at the address there. And if you enjoyed tonight, please do consider donating to us at the link at the top. So anything you can give would be really appreciated. We're a really small museum that's part of a charity, and like all cultural and charitable organisations, COVID has had a massive impact on our ability to fundraise. So if you'd like us to continue doing this sort of thing, please do consider donating. We'd also love to hear what you think. So you can, there'll be there'll be a questionnaire sent out in the email, but we're also on social media, and we have a newsletter on the website that you can sign up to if you'd like to either get in touch or keep up with what we're doing. We will be having an exciting announcement about our new exhibition relatively soon, so if you keep tabs on our newsletter and social media, then you'll be able to keep up to date with everything that's going on over the next few months. So I think that's it from us. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and thanks again for joining.
Right, thank you everyone, and thanks Andrew.
Thanks very much. I'm very sorry about the video and stuff.
The joys of technology.
Yeah, it's I mean, the Teams meetings I did this morning with students all went fine, and then
Well, we've all soldiered on, and thank you so much for
okay.
bringing the backup technology.
Yeah, okay, thank you. All of you have a good evening, and enjoy what fireworks you can, I guess.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.